US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping just wrapped up their first face to face meeting in 6 years. Is the outcome what you expected at all?
I would say that the meeting is not as bad as it could have been. I think there was a lot of concern going into the meeting that Xi Jinping would press Trump on Taiwan. And there was some reporting to that effect in the weeks prior. That Xi Jinping would press Trump to allow the export of very powerful NVIDIA chips that China doesn't have access to. And so I think that the two kind of most dangerous scenarios did not come to pass. But what we know, the bottom line here, for me at least, is that Beijing saw that it has a big card that it can play against the United States, the rare earths card, that the United States doesn't really have a way in the short term of de-risking from China on rare earths, finding alternate suppliers, building a domestic supply chain here at home. And I think in China's view, its decision to hit back and hit back hard, escalate the trade war, paid dividends. So I think that if you're sitting in Beijing, if you're Xi Jinping, I think you're fairly happy with the outcome of this meeting.
What do you make of Trump's comments that Taiwan didn't come up in his talks with Xi?
I expected going into this meeting that both sides would prioritize a kind of ceasefire in the economic realm, which is exactly what we got. But I do think that Xi Jinping is going to have a much bigger opportunity to press Trump on Taiwan during his visit to Beijing, which he said is slated for April of next year.
Now, in a recent article, you said that the US could leverage these trade talks to gain some stability in the Taiwan Strait. Is there any precedent for that?
In my view, the status quo or the way that cross-strait relations have evolved, Beijing views that as in its favor, right? I mean, the gray zone coercion continues to increase. The military activity around Taiwan continues to intensify. It doesn't really pay a price for that. Part of what I tried to do is push back against the notion that a U.S. declaration that it opposes Taiwan independence would be a good idea, or cutting security cooperation with Taiwan, or not advocating for Taiwan's participation in international organizations. I think those are all bad paths to go down. But I do think that we could potentially negotiate with the Chinese some kind of mutual military pullback. Now, the good thing about working in this realm would be that steps on both sides would be reversible. So if the Chinese don't meet their commitments, the United States could, undo what it agreed to do. Whereas the kind of statements on Taiwan independence, once you've made those, that's a new baseline for U.S. policy. You can't really undo those.
And finally, are there any takeaways that Taipei can derive from this meeting?
If I was in Taipei, I wouldn't be reading too much into the meeting and breathing a sigh of relief and saying, okay, well, we're never going to come up in U.S.-China negotiations, and clearly neither leader wants to prioritize talking about Taiwan. I think that's the wrong read. I think that it's mostly a product of a relatively short meeting and having much larger priorities that need to get hammered out between the leaders. So, I think that Taipei might be breathing a sigh of relief right now. It could have been much worse, but I wouldn't assume that nothing will happen for the rest of Trump's presidency. We